listening to Hotel Bar Sessions, the podcast where three philosophers sit down at the end of a long conference day to chop it up at the hotel bar, which, as we all know, is where the real philosophy happens.
Well, hello there, listeners, and hello, Lee and Jen. Welcome back to the bar. This is Hotel Bar Sessions. Welcome back to the podcast, everyone. And today we have an exciting discussion with a special guest who we'll meet in just a moment. But before we do, let's get started in the usual way. I'm going to ask my colleagues what they're having to drink and what they want to put on the jukebox. Starting with Jen, are you thirsty?
I am. I have had a long day of concurrent conference sessions, so I am just going to have a margarita. It's a classic for a reason. And on the jukebox, I am going to put Thunder by Imagine Dragons.
Just a young gun with a quick fuse. I was uptight, wanna let loose. I was dreaming of bigger things and wanna leave my old life behind. Not a yes sir, not a follower. Fit the box, fit the mold, have a seat in the foyer. Take a number. I was lightning before the
As I was reading Laura's book, we'll meet her in a minute, I was imagining that the new right bros think of themselves as the protagonists from Thunder, because it's all about not conforming with society and going your own way, breaking out of the shell of societal standards. I don't think they're really doing that, but I think they think they're doing that. Mm-hmm. So they would want it for their theme song.
Mm-hmm.
Lee, how about you?
Well, I'm just going to have 2 fingers of Buffalo Trace with A-Rock tonight. And my song choice is Alan Jackson's She Just Started Liking Cheatin' Songs.
She just started liking cheating songs, and what's bothering me, I don't know if it's the cheating she likes or just the melody.
I would like to dedicate this song to all of the Democrats who just took all of the political capital that we have been gathering up for them in the last couple of months, including with the No Kings protests and with the recent elections. And instead of capitalizing on that capital, they just wasted it. They just got played like a fiddle by the Republicans. Alan Jackson's song basically talks about this girl that he says has just started liking cheatin' songs, and he can't figure out if she likes the cheatin' or the melodies. And that's how I feel about all the Democrats right now. I can't figure out if they like the cheatin' or the melodies.
Yeah,
but they're breaking my heart.
You make my margarita a double.
To be fair there, Lee's talking about the 8 senators who voted to move some legislation forward, and 2 of them aren't technically Democrats. One of them is Angus King, he's independent, and the other one is John Fetterman, and we don't even know what he is. So, Lee, I see that we have a guest here at the Hotel Bar Sessions. Why don't you introduce us?
We do, and I'm so excited about our guest tonight, Laura K. Field, who is an associate with the Illiberalism Studies program at George Washington University, a non-resident fellow at the Brookings Institution, and a visiting scholar in residence at American University. In addition to her academic work, she has written for The New Republic, Politico, The Bulwark, Le Monde, and many other publications. She holds a PhD in government from the University of Texas at Austin and lives in Washington, D.C., right here with me. Her book, Furious Minds, The Making of the MAGA New Right, which is going to be our topic today, is now out with Princeton University Press, actually literally hot off the press. Laura is also an old friend of mine, as we were colleagues at Rhodes College in Memphis in the early 2010s, where, by the way, her husband also played in my weekly poker game. So, hi, Austin. But she is not only a keen and incisive thinker, but a genuinely warm and funny person. And I'm really so glad that she agreed to join us today. So, welcome to the bar, Laura. What are you drinking and what are you playing on the jukebox?
Thank you, Lee, and nice to meet you guys. I am drinking champagne because it's my first book, and so just going to get a bottle of champagne for everybody.
Yeah.
I've got my fake champagne here.
You know, it's probably only sparkling wine because Champagne region of France.
Exactly. I've got my sparkling wine here. And I'm going to put a song, which is actually a video I watched a lot and listened to while I wrote the book, called No Lie, which is Sean Paul and Dua Lipa.
Feel your eyes, they all over me. Don't be shy, take control of me. Get the vibe, it's gonna be lit tonight. No lie, hypnotize, pull another one, it's alright. I know
thought it was good for a philosophy podcast. No lie. Even though it's just a really sexy song and it's a really cool song. And I love the song. There's not much more to it than that. So
It's Jean-Paul Sartre, right?
exactly.
2 points.
Bob, what about you? What are you drinking and what are you playing on the jukebox?
Well, weirdly enough, last night I was at a bar here in Paris called La Résistance.
Hey.
The Resistance. And there I had quite a nice drink. I'd like to have another one. It's called an Ultima Palabra. And it's made up of tequila and chartreuse, lime, and cactus syrup. So it's almost like a margarita, but better. And for my musical selection, because, I moved back to Paris recently from Florence, and the Florentines, the Italians in general, have a great resistance song that we need to keep on our side because there's too much effort on the right to try to make it part of their side. So let's play some Bella Ciao.
Da partigiano, oh bella ciao, bella ciao, bella ciao, ciao, ciao. E se muoio da partigiano, tu mi devi seppellire e seppellire lassù in montagna. Oh bella ciao, bella ciao, bella ciao, ciao, ciao. Seppellire lassù in montagna.
Bella Ciao is a war-era song from the Partigiani, the partisans who fought against fascism, describing their camaraderie, describing their love for la patria, the country, and their need to win this thing against the forces of fascism. And ever since then, it's become sort of the defining resistance song, not just in Italy, but throughout Europe.
Good choice.
So, Lee, thanks so much for inviting your friend Laura to join us today. This book of hers, I started reading over the weekend and could barely put it down. And I've got many questions. So why don't you take a minute to introduce the topic that we're going to be discussing today, and let's see how far off the rails we go this time.
Well, I'm going to introduce the topic by reference to the classic mockumentary, This is Spinal Tap, which I'm just going to assume everyone has seen. But there's a famous scene in Spinal Tap where the fictional guitarist Nigel explains that his amp goes all the way to 11 instead of the usual 10 for volume. And most blokes, he says, will play at 10, but when you need that extra push off the cliff, what do? You turn it up to 11. And when I listen to my fellow citizens these days, it does seem like everyone has turned it up to 11.
Yeah.
Like the temperature of the public feeling is stuck on boil. This might be because I live in DC, but I don't really think that that's true. I think it's much more widespread, like a fury has taken over the nation. In her timely and sobering new book, Furious Minds, The Making of the MAGA New Right, Laura Field takes the intensity of our situation seriously. She maps the New Right's intellectual rise from nationalist populists to post-liberal theorists and media entrepreneurs, and shows how their moral certainty and grievance politics captured the energy the liberal center failed to meet. Field traces the ideas, institutions, and personalities that fused culture war spectacles with a critique of liberal modernity, arguing that liberals ceded the moral podium by speaking in procedures instead of purposes. Today, we're going to focus on the concluding chapter of this very, very excellent text, which is entitled Ecce Furor, in which Field reaches back to Aeschylus's Oresteia when Athena seats and renames the Furies so that rage doesn't eat the city alive. Field's argument is bracing and a little bit scary. No goddess is coming to restore order. We're going to have to do the work ourselves. If the mood of the age is fury, can we seed it without crowning it? Do we still believe that liberalism is more than just a truce? Can we say what it's for without turning Puritan or smug? Field's conclusion is not a eulogy for liberalism, but a provocation. Stop ceding virtue to illiberals. Speak passionately about liberal goods, build institutions, especially educational ones, that cultivate thick civic and humanistic formation, and in the meantime, litigate, legislate, organize, and run for office. The Furies are real, but so are the resources for a liberal counter-renaissance, if we can find the courage to claim them. Well, again, Laura, I'm so excited that you agreed to join us here at the Hotel Bar. I think this is a fantastic book, but I'm just going to go ahead and assume that all of our listeners haven't read it cover to cover yet. And so I'm wondering if, just to start out, you could give us a kind of overview of your argument and the main bullet points of the book.
Sure thing. And Lee, it's so fun to see you. I think you're the best, and you were really good to me at Rhodes College when I was just starting out teaching. So I'm sure everyone listening adores you, but thank you for having me. And that was a great summary that you just gave, especially of the conclusion. So that's going to be helpful. I think you caught on to some of the deepest themes of the book, which I was kind of smuggling in as I wrote it, which are not really the foreground. So thank you. The book is basically a history of the MAGA new right, so the intellectual movement behind Trumpism. You know, the MAGA movement is pretty big. It includes all kinds of stuff, but I was really only equipped to and only focused on the intellectual side of things. So a coalition started forming in 2016 of people who weren't really on board with Trump necessarily before, but started articulating what he stood for from a conservative theoretical perspective before he was even elected. And at that point, they were really in the wilderness doing that. But after Trump got elected, they kind of coalesced into a movement gradually over the course of the first Trump administration, and then way more after actually January 6th. So I sort of thought there would be an off-ramp and it would be over. But instead, it continued to build. They really captured the movement and the institutions of the right. I mean, you can see all kinds of evidence for that now, everything happening at the Heritage Foundation. So we could talk about some of that current stuff. But the book's all about these thinkers and intellectuals who became the engine of intellectual Trumpism, which I know sounds like an oxymoron, but my point is that it's not really. It is maybe for the whole movement and for the man, but not for what's going on in D.C. and around the world, where there are all these right-wing populist takeovers, or at least the rise of these right-wing movements. So the book chronicles that from 2016 to 2024. It's kind of bookended just after the election. It profiles the different figures who were involved, tries to outline the key moments where they all started to come together and how that all works. And I was basically trying to do three things with the book. I was trying to explain this, to profile the people, capture the moments, and explain the ideas, because I think the ideas are really important. They are a big driver of a lot of what's happening. Secondly, I wanted to capture some of the allure of this movement for especially young people, because, I mean, I'm not drawn to it anymore, but I kind of come from conservative academic circles originally, where I studied with a bunch of Straussian political philosophy people. And I'm still certainly drawn to a lot of that, the books. And I think people might be surprised to see how much these intellectuals see themselves as, you know, representing the great books tradition, the good, the true, and the beautiful. I mean, it's not surprising. Actually, that was even kind of surprising to me. The shamelessness with which they exploit that tradition, which is a tradition I care about. So I tried to convey some of the allure, how maybe people can get caught up in this stuff. And then I also just wanted to convey a sense of urgency, because I think one thing that people don't really appreciate in the general public is just how radical some of this stuff is, and how illiberal, how anti-modern.
So I was very interested to hear your genetic history there, your philosophical genetic history, that you come from Straussian circles. When I was an undergraduate, a lot of my professors were Straussian, sort of first generation Straussians.
Wow.
And I read with great interest your chapter on the Claremont group, because they are the descendants. They are distant cousins of ours in some ways, right?
Yeah.
So there was Leo Strauss, first of all, who was a student of Heidegger, friend of Arendt, and a very careful reader of texts. You may disagree with him on some things, but you have to agree that he was a very careful reader of texts. And he taught his first generation of students like Alan Bloom and Stanley Rosen and Harvey Mansfield how to read carefully as well. And they carried on that tradition. And some of them established places like the Committee on Social Thought at the University of Chicago, which as a name always sounded a little bit suspicious to me, the Committee on Social Thought. And revitalized the curriculum at St. John's University in Annapolis. And, you know, had influence in a wide range of places, but they were still reasonable people. And it's only a generation after them when the kooky ones start to appear. If there is a thread of Straussianism, I mean, how far back on the thread of the Straussian family tree do you want to go to start to see the seeds of this movement? You know, because we have great grandpa Leo and then great uncles Alan Bloom, who does appear in your book, and some of these other figures I mentioned in the next generation after that, who were probably our teachers.
Yeah.
So a lot of the fault is with our generation, the great-great-grandchildren of Leo Strauss.
Yeah. I mean, the Wall Street Journal ran a review of the book, which, I mean, I was excited to see. It was sort of lukewarm at best, but they say that I blamed Leo Strauss for Harry Jaffa's personality, which is absurd because I don't think Leo Strauss is directly to blame in any way. I think that the book probably Straussians might take it personally because that's where I'm coming from. And that is how I'm connected to this stuff, if at all, right? I applied to Claremont Graduate University when I was applying for grad schools. They are certainly adjacent to my worlds. And I think they think of themselves as the true Straussians representing the school, which I think is also absurd, but you know, it's true of them. But the line is not direct. I'm not here to defend Strauss either. And it's just not something I care that much about. But I think that you do have Leo Strauss concerned in really deep ways about the state of modern virtue and morality. Nietzsche prefigured this like terrible crisis, right, of modernity. And I think Leo Strauss saw that unfold and blamed modern philosophy in some of the ways that the new right that I'm writing about does. Relativism, postmodernism, all of the critical studies and everything, that's where they locate the cultural problem.
That's interesting because that's exactly what Alan Bloom did in
and Bloom too.
1986 or whatever, when The Closing of the American Mind came out.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's this consistent story that keeps getting reinforced about the vacuum of morality, the questions Lee started us off with at the top there. And Leo Strauss talked about the world in these dichotomous terms, right? The ancients versus the moderns, Athens versus Jerusalem. And so in my book, I do sort of do a pretty detailed account of how I think the Claremont School went wrong. And I think basically it's in advocating for this really jingoistic representation of the American founding. That is, they are the only arbiters of what it means to be American. And so there's a closedness to it and a jingoism, and it's really dogmatic and top down. So it's not even democratic, for one thing, but it's also been contorted to this paleoconservative nativism. So it's quite far afield even from what Harry Jaffa was doing. I think there's something consistent that I wouldn't blame Strauss for, though. I think the way he taught, so his emphasis on esotericism, noble lies, there's a kind of cultishness to the Straussian schools, especially over generations. I wouldn't necessarily blame him for that. It's like an incidental fallout from what he got up to because he was concerned with the 20th century issues. And so he was speaking a certain way historically. But I think ultimately what Leo Strauss was writing about and this stuff about esotericism and noble lies and all this, I mean, that's Plato. And the problem of the corruption of the youth and smart young people going crazy, I mean, that's just a problem of politics that I think I almost blame liberals more for not paying more attention to it than I would have blamed Leo Strauss. The book has these moments where I say a lot about the Straussians, but that's more incidental to my own story, I think, than it is to the actual political problems we're facing. But I'd love to hear what you guys think, because I don't know that I'm right about that. I mean, maybe Leo Strauss is guiltier than I say, but I think he was more like Bloom in that deep down he was sympathetic with liberal democracy.
I think that might be true for he and Bloom. I'm not so sure about the generations after.
Yeah, the students. Yeah.
I don't want to get too inside baseball here, but I think this might be important going forward. And that is what we mean when we say modern or modernism.
Sure.
Because in different disciplines, it refers to different time periods. So in philosophy, normally, I think when people refer to modernism, they're talking basically the Enlightenment, right? Like through Kant. And then whatever is post-Kant. I mean, the 19th century is always kind of hard to parse. It sort of sets up what philosophers call postmodernism. But that is not true in political theory. It's not true in literature. I mean, different disciplines have different ways of referring to modernism. So I do think it's important, just for listeners' sake, to point out that the critique of modernism for a lot of the new intellectual right is a critique of what philosophers would call postmodernism.
No, also modernism, Lee. Like they're going after Hobbes, Locke, Rousseau sometimes. Like they really hate Francis Bacon.
Well,
I mean, if
yeah.
they hate the epistemic openness that all started. I mean, I think for many of them, the Claremont Institute's a little different, but even Harry Jaffa said the reason why the founding is so amazing, he saw it as Aristotelian. I mean, this is inside baseball, but the East Coast Straussians see it as much more modern and are sort of okay with that.
Yeah.
It's very weird. That's actually one of the things that surprised me in doing all this. They're kind of anti-modern in the way you would think. They hate the Enlightenment. They're anti-Locke. They're anti-rationalism in a lot of ways. Not universally. I mean, they'll parse it in different ways, but like someone like Patrick Deneen, certainly. And even the Claremont people have turned, they've got this paleoconservative vector that is pretty prominent now. So,
But wouldn't you say, though, to the extent that at least one of the main messages of the new right is that liberals are immoral, right? Like they don't understand virtue.
Yeah.
That is ascribing to liberals this postmodern relativism that you were just talking
Oh,
about
absolutely. I'm just saying they would say that that started with Hobbes.
before. Okay. Yeah.
That
fair.
destruction of the foundations of the true virtue-oriented political mode. It's amazing to me how little refinement they have when they're talking about this stuff. And then some of them will trace it to the early moderns. And the Straussians kind of do that too.
Yeah, that was a big theme. The quarrel between the ancient and the moderns was a huge Straussian theme.
Well, I was going to say, I'm glad you said there's not a lot of refinement when talking about what I would call, so again, Lee pointed out that we all have different ways of talking about these eras of history. I teach political philosophy, and so I would call Hobbes, Locke, Rousseau early moderns.
Yeah.
Yeah, me too.
But you pointed out that these folks have a lack of refinement when they're talking about these figures. And that struck me as just exactly right when I was reading your book, because I kept thinking they're just getting the history wrong,
Absolutely.
just over and over again.
yeah.
And so I think we could talk about Strauss and like a great man theory of history where we attribute it to individuals. But I kind of want to get into what is it that's driving these intellectual ideas, because I'm partially worried that it's a real misreading of the actual philosophy and a real misreading of liberal theory, which was not meant to be relativist, but was meant to stand up for a particular set of values like rule of law, like equality.
Before you answer, if I could just jump on to the back of that question, because I'm actually curious as a lapsed Straussian, which I think is a fair description of you. What do you think is the fairest version? I mean, I don't know if fairest is exactly the right word, but yeah, no, fairest is the right word. What do you think is the fairest version of the claim liberalism lacks virtue?
Well,
Because I do totally agree with Jen that there's a lot of really terrible misreadings going on here.
I mean, I do too. So it's been going on. It's just a clusterfuck. Oh, do we swear on this thing?
Yeah,
Yeah,
swear.
we absolutely
Okay,
do.
it's a clusterfuck of terrible readings. I also think the Straussians get early modern stuff wrong. Like, I disagree with so much of that. But the fairest way to understand this claim about morality, like if we're talking about the early moderns, right? They were, in my sort of still Straussian way of understanding it, they're trying to turn down the temperature in politics. There are religious wars going on. There are crusades, English Civil War. And there's also a lot of theocratic absolutist government. And so these people, these men, if that's the story, is going to go with is that these guys changed the history, their writings. But what they were doing is they were trying to create a politics that no longer depended so much on people's thick understanding of the good, right, or comprehensive life doctrines or religious foundations, that they could find a way to get people to live in politics together even when they disagreed about the Trinity or what have you. But that meant sort of turning away from some of those issues pretty explicitly. And so to have the rule of law, procedural liberalism, I mean, this is all collapsed into, this has happened over the couple hundred years, right? But toleration, you have mechanisms of government, separation of church and state. So the Straussians, they say that the early moderns, they built on low but solid ground. And so that meant instead of caring about how to get into heaven, or like the ancients did, like how to be an awesome total Pericles or warrior, that you would maybe care about commerce, money making, the sciences. So the sciences is a big thing for Francis Bacon. So like trying to diversify people's interests so that they weren't so devoted to these singular passions. And then I think Hobbes is a singular figure here, right? He's like, let's worry about what we're all afraid of, just dying a nasty death, and try to just get along on a more basic plane. And then maybe after we've established that peaceful politics of commerce and liberal trade, and we've redirected our passions away from heaven and down towards this world, the low but solid ground of security, peace, health, then maybe we can sort of rebuild. I mean, this is my view, is like they still left place for different kinds of moral communities and new kinds of moral possibilities and political possibilities and community. But the basic idea was, no, turn down the temperature, low but solid ground, and give up on virtue. That's how they see it. That's how they talk about it. And that basic formula is how a lot of these conservatives talk. You turn off the virtue scale.
Hey there, dear listeners. You know, everybody agrees that the best time of the conference is after the conference is over and we're all hanging out in the bar having discussions. It's our social hour. And speaking of being social, you should be following us on social media. You can find us on Blue Sky, YouTube, and Facebook. And in all three of those places, we're at Hotel Bar Sessions. So please follow us on social media and keep the social hour going.
So in the last section, Laura, I think we agreed the new conservatives are misreading the early moderns, and I want to go even further with that critique and say that these new conservatives in your reading, they're trying to say the early moderns gave up on virtue, but we're going back to the ancients and we are reclaiming virtue. I think that's a really fundamental mistake because the early moderns, Hobbes, Locke, Rousseau, Kant, they saw themselves as pulling from the ancients. If we go back to Plato, this is what it means to be a member of the polis, is to be a person in the city who determines what to do by discussion and debate, not by force. And so I think the problem here is even deeper. It's not only about who's claiming the ancients, but about what it means to be political.
Yeah, absolutely. And they're just refusing to see the moral roots of a lot of liberalism. And they refuse to see liberalism in antiquity. I mean, we can use the language of liberalism in all kinds of ways, and they could quibble with us about some of that, or with me. But, you know, the Republican tradition they will appeal to, but they just deny that liberalism has anything to do with those things. In a way, I think they're not conservative enough, because if you think about Aristotle and his claims about virtue, and I think a lot of that's pretty compelling, right? I don't think we're driven necessarily by some external notion of goodness or whatever Plato meant by that, but we are, I think, morally driven, and morality or norms pervade our lives. Our values seem to be something that constitutes us as human beings, that we're driven by the good in some way or another. And they deny that to liberals. They just say liberals are about technocracy and money making, and it's just preposterous. Whereas I would say, no, I think everybody's driven by a conception of the good. They differ about what that is, what that means for them. So there's a real straw man here. I think that they're not Aristotelian enough. I don't know. That's my way of seeing it. So I think that they're absolutely deranged in their reading of the ancients. But they also emphasize the religious tradition a lot more.
So the religious tradition is something that I want to come back to as well, because it was dear to the Straussians, of course. But there is another line of thinking sort of in the margins of your text, although you do address it, and you've been addressing it here without even naming it. And that's a line of thought that comes out of really kind of the internet in a lot of ways. The accelerationists, people like Nick Land, who are very anti-Enlightenment. Mencius Moldbug, his real name is Curtis Yarvin. You know, even Peter Thiel cites them, but also René Girard, the literary critic, as a major inspiration. And Girard's best-known book is called The Violence of the Sacred. In it, you know, he makes arguments about scapegoats, about the need for some sort of sacrality within a community in order to make it function. And so I'm wondering if you have some thoughts on that line of thinking to complement what Jen is addressing.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the way a lot of these guys are reading the world is that they're seeing the ancient forces that are no longer with us in their view, or that are not represented enough. There's a book by R.R. Reno, who's the editor of First Things magazine, this Christian conservative journal, called The Return of the Strong Gods. And then in the underbelly, which is kind of how I place the people you've just mentioned, including people like Mencius Moldbug, and then this guy Bronze Age Pervert, he's trying to rehabilitate the Bronze Age and the Homeric world, but again, totally bastardized version of it. And this guy has a PhD from Yale in political philosophy. He's written, you know, pseudo-Nietzschean textbooks that are apparently quite popular with young men. But it's this effort to kind of regenerate the masculinity of the ancient world as they understand it. And so the tech side of this, because some of it is so disconnected from the truth, as I understand it, of these books and of these traditions, it's very hard for me, frankly, to read that stuff. Like, I don't know how much you've read, Lee.
Too much.
Yeah, and I find it hard. I emphasized it maybe less than I should have because it seems pretty incoherent. But that's what they're playing with. They're playing with these sort of deep drives. They think it's really profound. Some of it is, there are insights there. It's just that then it takes these really ugly turns and it becomes something unrecognizable. But I think that's what we're talking about. It appeals to these ancient drives.
And I think we can't overlook the fact that it is all young men. Sorry to be the feminist in the room, but I will just say I think it's actually very important that this is all young men. It's very masculine. You raise a couple of times the crisis of masculinity, which, to be fair, I have almost no patience with. But one thing I was very much struck by is how the Furies that you talk about are women.
Mm-hmm.
And they are portrayed as the old gods, as hysterical and irrational and unreasonable.
Mm-hmm.
And I was so deeply struck by the gender politics of these ancient Greek plays. And so I was hoping you could talk a little bit about that, because I think that's in some ways the core, or a part of the core, of what's going on here.
Yeah, thank you. So, the title of the book is Furious Minds. And as I was writing the book and just in my own thinking about all of this, I really love the Ancient Oresteia trilogy, this group of ancient texts by Aeschylus. That's the first and only existing trilogy that we have from antiquity. And it's a really profound political text.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of moves from a world of ancient vengeance and retributive justice over the course of these three plays to something, I think you can call it more liberal, more procedural, more deliberate. But the plays are also sort of full of irony and uncertainty. And I think there's a real beauty to how it ends on this high note, but it's kind of like dissatisfying because it's also very funny and absurd the way it all unfolds. And it's kind of dark. This is very happy play, but it's also kind of dark because it's so implausible, is my reading of it. So anyway, there's these characters of the ancient Furies, these chthonic goddesses who stand for blood ties, familial bondage, honoring your mother.
Mm-hmm.
And in the end, they get a bit of appeasement from these Apollonian gods. Like if you've read The Birth of Tragedy by Nietzsche, you could kind of see that happening in these plays, the Dionysian Furies as the older forces. And as I was writing the conclusion, I had already put some stuff about these plays earlier in the book. But in the conclusion, I was thinking about the Furies and the anger and J.D. Vance and all of his bros and just how this sort of was unfolding. And the gender stuff, I'm not really a gender scholar, but I let myself be playful with it because I just thought there was something there intuitively that was meaningful, and how they were behaving was so full of that same kind of energy, but it was also upside down and backwards. And so I just sort of let myself go with it. But I ended up personifying them as these new masculinist Furies that were in this uproar. I realized what had happened was I had drafted the conclusion before the election, and it had an even more olive branch character in the original version. This one still may be a little bit that way, where I think, do we have to appease the Furies? How do we appease the Furies? What about my Fury? Because by the time I wrote the conclusion and then the election happened, I was really angry. I started being angry at Joe Biden early in 2020. I just thought, this fucker, how dare he? How is he still running? I was just consumed by it. I couldn't believe it was happening. So I know that I had written the conclusion with a little bit sort of still hoping that Kamala would win. And the original draft was a little more, tempered, like we got to play nice. And there's still a little bit of that in there. And I don't know. It's a hard thing. I don't really know the answer here because I genuinely, you'll see I sort of pitch these humanistic institutions. I take on the mantle of Athena and try to play nice a little bit. But I'm really angry too, right? And so it's really dicey.
What's really productive about your use of the Aeschylus trilogy in your final chapter is that it makes very clear what you are identifying as kind of the liberal miss, like what liberals miss.
Yeah.
So your diagnosis is that there's too much rationalism, not enough ritual or symbolism or solidarity. But at the same time, that's kind of also what liberals do right.
Yeah.
When they do it right, that there is too much rationalism, not enough ritual, symbolism, and solidarity.
Yeah.
So I really like for you just to maybe talk a little bit more about why the Furies really captured the new right's mobilized anger and performance of anger in a way that is different than the anger that you just described, that you feel and that I feel, and that I think most people on the left feel also towards the liberals.
Yeah, I mean, I think the ancient furies, these figures in the plays, are pretty unhinged. They want to just tear this guy up. Orestes, who has killed his mother. His mother killed his dad. I mean, it's complicated. But you get this build up and this cycle. And Orestes, he was pretty deliberate about what he did. But they come in with just this sort of raging cycle, like it's tied to all of these prior cycles of violence. And they just want to chase him down and tear him up. And there's not much sort of logos in any of that. And they're also not very good at it. So there's kind of a manic quality to them. And I guess that's what I see happening on the right. It's completely unhinged. I don't think they're angry about nothing. We can identify the things that they're angry about. We can talk about problems they rightly see. But there's like maybe raging nihilism at the heart of it. I mean, maybe Achilles would have been a good one too, right? But again, Achilles just has been taken over by something.
Yeah.
I don't think that's the core of his character, but that's what happens in the end.
Yep.
That's how I was thinking about it, Lee. And I don't think that's quite the same as somebody who's trying to make sense of it, as somebody who's trying to see what they're doing. And I mean, it's just a different kind, there's a different quality to that. And it's dangerous because it's totally destructive. There's nothing there that, I mean, not nothing, but it doesn't have a very clear constructive aim.
So I want to pick up on something you said in response to Lee, which is that you pointed out that what Orestes does, it's complicated. There are reasons and counter reasons and cycles. And I think in many ways, that's the liberal impulse. The liberal impulse is to say, it's complicated.
Yeah.
And the new right's impulse is to say, it's not complicated. You did a wrong, and so you should be literally ripped to shreds and eaten. I thought it was very telling that a lot of people on the new right are calling folks on the left unhuman. As you point out, at the end, Athena has to appease the Furies. There's no reasoning with them. There's no being in a polis with them. There's only, you get to sit by the sea, and we'll sacrifice to you. And I'm concerned that that's also the liberal impulse, to appease what you can't reason with. And that's really concerning to me because I do not want the answer to be play nice, because I think that's going to lead to a lot of very bad things.
But there's also no eliminating them.
Yeah, I know.
I mean, isn't that really the lesson, to the extent that there's a lesson to this trilogy? I mean, isn't that the lesson that we can't eliminate them? I mean, we are human beings with desires that are oftentimes manic and irrational, and we're not going to eliminate that from the polis, but we can give it a seat as long as that seat is governed in a way.
Well, and I think in the end, several things actually happen in the play that are interesting. One of which is they get exhausted. They're lying there in the temple, I believe, at the start of that play, and the anger has exhausted them. And I think that's part of anger in its deepest form, when it's really taken hold of you like that. I don't know how much hope we can take from that, but that is part of their character. She does the olive branch thing, but they also respond surprisingly well to that recognition. Once they're recognized, it's quite beautiful. I mean, they say, oh, there's a kind of yearning for dignity and recognition there that she's able to fulfill that's humanizing and right, and I think liberal. She's not trying to punish them for anything. And I think the other thing about the trilogy is that their angers are legitimate, and their treatment has been really repulsive in many, many ways, and they haven't been very good at standing up for themselves. And so it's complicated. I guess one thing I'm trying to do with the book is show how some of the leaders of this movement are very destructive and horrible in ways I think of, but that's not necessarily true of the average MAGA voter or Republican voter who has a different life and is not connected to politics and doesn't think this way and would be, I think, shocked. They're probably not going to read my book, but maybe someday it'll trickle down. And so they do deserve a seat at the table. We can do a lot better for our young Republican male students or whatever. I mean, they deserve some dignity and some respect. I've been in academia long enough to see a ton of disrespect to those young people. And I mean, I've probably done it too. A lot of it I totally sympathize with, but I think we should work to do better because those young people, I think we all care about them and they're alienated.
I think you're absolutely right that recognition is an absolutely essential olive branch that needs to be extended to people who are feeling furious, who are feeling hurt, who are feeling forgotten, who are feeling unrecognized. I think one of the problems that your book really illuminates quite well is that what the MAGA New Right did was it said, hey, we see you, we hear you, we know why you're angry, get angrier.
Exactly. Yeah. They said, get angrier. Yeah.
They just refueled the furies.
Yeah.
And what the left did was that they said, we are going to carte blanche discredit anything that you say. We are not going to recognize the actual fury that you feel or why you feel it. And that's where we lost, I think.
And, we sum that up in politics by saying, look, the Republicans show up with a 3-word motto, lock her up, lock her up. And the Democrats show up with charts and graphs explaining why locking her up would be a not cost-efficient basis for blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
Well, I think that the problems Jen identified are also like anytime you're in any specific location at a university or in an actual context of the world trying to manage these things, it's very hard because, a lot of the MAGA rhetoric is dehumanizing and vicious. And they've absolutely exploited the goodness and kindness of wokeness and turned it into some monster that it isn't. And so it's really, really difficult. And in every classroom, all of those things get hyped up in ways that are nuts. So if we're thinking about what to actually do in our classrooms, I'm not teaching right now, but for people listening, I don't know how much daylight there is between what needs to happen and what is actually happening. I do have criticisms of the academy and the smugness and the Ivy League bullshit that's everywhere and the corporate, all the things, right? There's so many things, but it's really difficult because they've weaponized it so well.
If you made it this far, congratulations! You're officially one of us at the Hotel Bar. So do the thing. Like, subscribe, follow, click all the buttons. Whatever your podcast app calls it. It helps more people find Hotel Bar sessions. And honestly, it just makes us feel special. Hey, leave us a review if you're feeling generous or petty. We'll take either. We'll see you for the next round. Same time, same bar.
Well, welcome back. I hope everybody had a chance to refresh their drink. We're talking with Laura Field here and having a really fascinating discussion about the MAGA mindset. Laura does a great job of diagnosing the problem and understanding it. And I guess the question that remains now is, where do we go from here? If we've come to understand the problem, if we've done a great diagnostic, then what's the prognostic and how do we get there? We just were talking about basically recognizing the anger of people as Athena does with the Furies in the Oresteia and the way the Furies respond to that olive branch. Just recognizing that anger might be a step in the direction that we need to go. But what other steps need to be taken? I don't know.
Okay, I want to say something about this that is still super theoretical, and then we can maybe get into some more tangible things. Because I do list a few in the book, but you probably have better ideas than me about prognosis. And I want to try this out on you guys because I think you understand this sort of theoretical problem of liberalism, at least as the conservatives conceive of it, but agreeing that it's not really true to the history of liberalism. But I think that what they're exploiting is, liberalism does say we are not going to dictate how you live your life. That, I think, is a core piece of the liberal project. You get to choose your morality, your lifestyle. We're not going to hand you a comprehensive doctrine or religion that you have to follow.
Agreed.
That's good. But I think what that means, and I think if you've read Alexander Lefebvre's book, and you guys should have him on if you haven't. He's got a book called Liberalism as a Way of Life. And he talks a lot about Rawls and about the hollowness of our liberal world right now, that we fail to see that we live in a sort of pervasively liberal society in some ways, but also that in academic philosophy, he argues a fussy thing about, because of the success of political liberalism in Rawls's account, so this idea that we live in this pluralistic, neutral society that allows for everybody to have their own comprehensive doctrines, that because of the pervasiveness and the success of that model, academic philosophy no longer has anything to say to us about how best to live and doesn't really take on the question, doesn't really have the language with which to describe our own sort of moral universe. And I think there's something really compelling about that. But I was, again, in these weird Straussian circles, so maybe I'm too easily persuaded by that. Because I know also at universities, there's all kinds of genuine concern for those questions and involvement in that. But here's my point. As liberals, I think we could do better at just acknowledging the problem of moral uncertainty the problem of modern malaise, the problem of living in a pluralistic system that allows for very different modes of life, and the fact that we aren't handed that comprehensive guide. Our society doesn't have a religion that we all share. And so we could do a lot better in our institutions and maybe even in our political culture of just recognizing that problem. But I don't think politicians can be doing that. But I think somehow we need to be doing that so that we can just articulate it better, build community more deliberately, and help one another more.
I agree with the overall point that you're making. I'm not sure that I agree that A, politicians can't do that, or B, academic philosophy is not doing that. I think that academic philosophy is doing that. I think academic philosophy is still talking about how to live a good life. It has always been talking about how to live a good life.
Yes.
And it is practically impossible to make it stop talking about how to live a good life.
Yeah.
I think that the problem really is we have said this is not the job of politicians. And I think that has really been the downfall of the Democratic Party. So liberalism institutionally conceived. They think to be liberal means to not take a position, to allow for all things equally. And that has ended up breaking the heart of many liberals like myself, or many left-leaning people like myself, because of course there is this very difficult problem of talking about liberalism as classical liberalism, which would just be conservatism today, or leftism. I mean, that's a conversation for a whole nother podcast.
Right, but that's the discourse, right? But yeah.
But I think that one of the accusations that conservatives make about liberals is that the Democratic Party has abandoned this responsibility, abandoned the responsibility of saying, let's forward something. Let's say what we're for.
Yeah, and that doesn't mean we're going to shove it down everyone's throats in their private lives.
Yeah.
But I have to disagree with you a little bit there, Lee. As someone who works at a regional public university, so I'm not in the Ivy League world, which is what everybody talks about when they talk about academia.
And which 99% of us are not in.
Right?
Can we stop using that as a model?
Right. Can we talk about the thousands of colleges and universities, no offense, but that are not Claremont, that are not Harvard, that are not Columbia? As somebody who works in a purple state, in a relatively red-leaning city with lots of very excellent young students and a lot of non-traditional students, I can say that we are doing this work, and I think we have put forward values. I mean, the values are diversity, equity, inclusion, rule of law. We've been putting these forward at the university for years, and we've been recognizing young men who say, I feel like my future has been stolen. And I say over and over again in my classes, I understand that feeling. There's a really strong sense in which it has, but it hasn't been stolen from you by women. It hasn't been stolen from you by immigrants. You're placing the blame in the wrong place. And so I want to push back on this idea that liberalism has been hollow in the last couple of years. No, I think we've been fighting. And what we're facing is a serious backlash to the particular values that we've been forwarding, because people refuse to acknowledge that it's not the folks who are most marginalized and oppressed who are hurting them. It's the folks with the most power. But that upsets their complete understanding of the world, and so they're just not willing to accept it.
I mean, if I could just say, just in my own defense, that if I misspoke earlier, that is exactly what I meant to say, that I do think academic philosophy or academics are doing that. I think the Democratic Party is not doing that.
Okay, apologies. You got me on my high horse, and I was like, I'm off to the races.
That needed to be said.
No. Stay on it. Stay on it. I mean, that's the problem, right?
Yeah.
It's like there are not enough people on enough high horses.
Well, yeah, that could be the problem. I also think, I don't know, maybe in academia in general, that's the kind of thing I was trying to figure out sort of empirically and haven't had time. Like, I don't know the answer, because it seems like there are people doing this stuff all over the place. And yet in the social sciences, there's not much room for that. I still think there's not enough room for the humanities and not enough money pumped in, not enough sort of structure for that. And that there's a yearning for it. Do you know what I mean? Like,
say it again louder, but for the people in the back.
Yeah, exactly. Because I mean, I think about, say, Jordan Peterson is my go-to guy, who's not in the book at all, but like the guy sold millions of books giving young men advice on how to live. I haven't had time to read it or inclination.
Well, chapter 1 is called Make Your Bed. So figure that out.
But people do yearn for this kind of thing. They want some help making their way through life.
But Jordan Peterson is a sophist.
Oh,
at
completely.
heart,
But I'm
right?
saying,
I mean, of course he's effective.
oh yeah, I'm just saying like there's a yearning, and that's always going to be there. And shouldn't we be doing better at providing the opportunity for young people to think this stuff through seriously? And I guess I'll just say, like, because I didn't get that outside of Straussian circles. I grew up in Canada. It could be idiosyncratic to political science departments. And I just think there's a problem here with messaging or something. And one of the things I was drawn to was like they had read these old books in a way that suggested that you could learn from the books in like a real way. And that I didn't see in my English classes. And I love critical studies. Like I'm not trying to get anti-woke or anti-CRT. I think there's all kinds of ways of inquiry and modes of inquiry that give us value. But I think that this kind of Socratic mode or the Straussian mode, like that kind of humanism and liberal arts is not valued enough in our institutions. But again, it's very hard to get a synoptic account of any of this.
I agree with you. You heard it here first. More money in the humanities, folks.
Cosign.
But I'm going to disagree a little bit because I do think we're pulling ideas, we're pulling big ideas, we're pulling big values out of these books. But to reiterate what I said earlier, and I'll try to sharpen it a little bit, we're just not telling them what they want to hear. Because they don't want to hear that we have to treat the marginalized more equitably, that everybody deserves food for just being alive, that women should have the right to vote. There's an idea being floated around right now that we should repeal the 19th Amendment. Like, no, thank you. And if recognition means that I have to be like, well, I'm going to consider reasonably whether we should repeal the 19th Amendment, I'm not about to have that reasonable discussion because my answer is going to be no.
So here's a tension that I find in all of this. I mean, on the one hand, Laura, you just said the success of Jordan Peterson is not that astonishing because there is a very vast audience of people who do want to be told what to do. Make your bed, right? They want to be told what to do. And now here we have Jen saying that same group of people almost the exact same demographic doesn't want to be told what to do, at least not by us, or at least they don't want to be told what to value. Maybe that's the difference.
Yeah.
Is that a real tension, or is that just something I'm perceiving over drinks in a conversation?
I think the tension's real, and I think that's why we have to figure this out as liberals. What are we doing when we're talking about the values we care about, and how are we proceeding with that? Because I agree, like, I don't really want to entertain the 19th Amendment conversation or whatever, but I don't know, like, don't we have to? Don't we have to entertain all kinds of arguments in some contexts? Because you read Friedrich Nietzsche. I love Friedrich Nietzsche. And you got to entertain those arguments in a philosophy class. You can also say, and I totally disagree with this, and I think it's bullshit personally, but like, what's the argument there? Don't we have to engage those things? And as liberals, ultimately, we're not didactically trying to, I'm not saying that's what you're doing, Jen. Like, we have to at once agree with the values we stand for. We have to be able to articulate those, and we have to be able to argue for them while also not insisting that our students, especially, but, you know, in politics, we have to accept that people are going to disagree. They're going to have religious beliefs that means they think, you know, I don't deserve the right to vote because I'm a woman or gay or whatever. And it's like, that's what's so hard about liberalism. It's really shitty because people think that stuff. I don't think we can get rid of those. I mean, I think we have to just engage.
I agree with this, and I understand and actually appreciate that not all academics or not all left-leaning people agree with this, which is that we do have to engage even terrible, unpopular, sometimes offensive arguments. I mean, I do fundamentally believe that. I am not one of those people that will say, I'm just not going to entertain X argument because I disagree with it. And Jen, by the way, I'm not saying that you're saying that, but it is a not uncommon position among academics. What worries me, just to go back to the title of your book, Furious Minds, is that what philosophy ought to be doing is making our minds less furious.
Yeah.
That's really what we ought to be aiming for. And it seems to me that one of the real difficulties your book highlights and that we're feeling in our actual political environment is that there is a group of people out there who are intellectuals, quasi-intellectuals, whatever you want to call them, that are actually forwarding the idea of let's keep your mind furious. Your mind is best when it's furious. And that seems to me the difference between the new MAGA right intellectualism that you're describing and what I consider left-leaning or liberal intellectualism, which is that left-leaning liberal intellectualism is always going to say, no, we don't want to push you further into your furies. Let's take your furies. I mean, we should acknowledge them. We should recognize them, as you mentioned before. but let's put them on a bench, and acknowledge them and name them and find another way forward. Now, your argument is that unlike in Aeschylus's Oresteia, there's no goddess that's going to come along and do that for us. We're going to have to figure out how to do that ourselves. But I think the point still remains, like, we don't want furious minds. That's not how you can live in a world together.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's right. Ultimately, what's the value of philosophy? You work through some stuff in your soul, right? That's part of it.
Yeah.
So I agree with this. I want to just defend myself for a second here. I'm not saying that philosophers should be didactic in the classroom. I'm certainly not claiming that, because I also agree, Lee and Laura, that in the classroom is the place to have these very, very difficult discussions. And I'm a big fan of that. And I do it to the best of my ability. Philosophy really is the calm, cool hour. But this is to Lee's point, that philosophy is about the calm, cool hour. I think my worry is trying to say the whole world should be treated like a philosophy classroom. And I think that's extraordinarily dangerous.
Yes.
We can go back to Socrates. Part of Socrates' problem is that he tries to treat the Athenian court like a philosophy classroom. Bro, read the room.
Yeah.
You're in the wrong place to do that. My concern is that we ought to be treating all of politics like a philosophy classroom. No. Some things have been adjudicated, and we don't need to re-adjudicate them because, as Toni Morrison points out, they'll keep you talking until you're dead, and then you're dead.
I think that helps us in the distinction between what we do on campuses and in certain kinds of spaces and how much we concede certain things for the sake of argument or just as a genuine form of engagement with students and colleagues is quite different from what happens in all kinds of other spaces and especially in politics. I guess that's sort of the crux of it. What do we want our politicians to do? And I wish they would just basically be able to articulate liberal values in a compelling way, because it's sickening how little of that they do, is my view of it.
Because there's a difference between me in the philosophy classroom saying, hey, what do you think about the 19th Amendment? And
Yes.
J.D. Vance getting on a national stage and saying, no more 19th Amendment.
Absolutely.
But that last point that you made, Laura, takes us back to this idea of maybe the sacred. This is what the left is missing in some ways. We do need the 3-word chants. Lock him up, finally. Or kill them off. We do need something like that. No, not those.
Not those, though.
Those are not good.
Those are just fantastical projections of my inner fantasy life.
Not only fantastical, but furious.
Yeah.
Furious projections of my inner fantasy life.
But how about no kings?
No Kings is pretty good.
So No Kings, right, is where I was going. I organized or co-organized that event here in Paris. And it is something that gathers a lot of people together and brings them together for the purpose of standing for something. But we're just not sure what we stand for yet. We know what we stand against, but that's not enough.
Okay, so maybe Hotel Bar Sessions podcast is not NPR, but like NPR, we are also not receiving public funds anymore. Actually, we never received public funds. We have always been supported by you, our listeners. And to keep this podcast going and to keep our bar tabs open, we need your help. So please visit our Patreon page at patreon.com/hotelbarsessions and sign up to be one of our regular supporters. If that's a little bit too much of a commitment for you, no worries. We've also got options for one-time donations that you can make through PayPal, Venmo, or Cash App on our website. Just click on the Support Us tab at hotelbarpodcast.com. Every little bit that you can contribute helps defray the costs of what we do here and helps keep our Hotel Bar Sessions tab open and your Hotel Bar Sessions episodes flowing. Thanks in advance. We really appreciate your support. And now, back to the conversation. Well, unfortunately, this is not a democracy here at the bar, and our bartender has given us last call and is kicking us out. But as we sip on these last drinks, I would just like to pitch it back to you, Laura. I mean, one of the things that I really love the most about your book is that you don't just end with a kind of diagnostic nihilism. You actually do forward really concrete suggestions for how we might, as you say, recover this liberal renaissance, or at least a counter Furious Minds renaissance. And so, what are the last thoughts that you'd want to leave our listeners with about what to do going forward?
Thanks, Lee. Well, we've talked, about maybe some of the things in higher ed, and I say a few things about that, maybe new institutions. They've got these new civic centers all over the country in red states that are popping up that are kind of MAGA. I think we could probably do better than that, or at least join them and force them to engage with more than they might otherwise. I mean, I think what everybody's doing now on the ground is important, right? Litigating and running for things and trying to restore some sort of power to Congress is really, really important. But I think we also need to just get better at speaking about liberalism, about what it means. And I'm going to leave you with a little quote that I include in one chapter of the book, because one of the guys I write about, Michael Anton, completely bastardizes this passage from Lincoln, where Lincoln is talking about the meaning of equality and what the Declaration of Independence means and meant. And of course, Lincoln's interpreting history. It doesn't get the last word maybe, but he'll have it today. And so this is from his speech on the Dred Scott ruling, where basically Justice Taney said that Black people don't have the same dignity in our politics and don't deserve to have equal rights. And Lincoln says in response that the authors of the Declaration did mean something when they spoke of equality, and they were pretty explicit about it. And so this is Lincoln's understanding of what they meant. He says, "They had no power to confer such a boon. They meant simply to declare the right so that the enforcement of it might follow as fast as circumstances should permit. They meant to set up a standard maxim for free society, which should be familiar to all, constantly looked to, constantly labored for, and even though never perfectly attained, constantly approximated, and thereby constantly spreading and deepening its influence and augmenting the happiness and the value of life to all people of all colors everywhere."
Cosign.
That's so helpful. And I would encourage all of our listeners to copy the link to this podcast episode and to send it to those 9 senators who just sold us down the river.
Yeah, we need a renaissance in this real way of thinking, because it's there. It's in our history.
Yeah, let's do it. I'm here for it.
Laura, this has been such a great conversation, and I do really want to encourage everybody to go out and buy your book. Again, it's Furious Minds, The Making of the MAGA New Right by Princeton University Press. Still hot off the press, so get it before your friends do. Thanks so much for joining us, Laura.
Thanks, you guys. That was really fun.
Yeah, thanks so much, y'all.
I need another drink.